Patricia set her wine glass down with a small, deliberate click and smiled at me across the dinner table like she was delivering good news. "We've settled on the second week of March," she said. "$4,200 each for the flights, and the resort deposit is already due. We just need the transfer by Friday." 7 faces around that table. Derek stared at his plate. Nobody asked if I was coming. Nobody asked because they already knew I wasn't. I had been in this family for 16 years. 16 years of holidays I organized, dinners I cooked, midnight drives to in-law emergencies I never billed anyone for. And 3 days ago, while I stayed late at the office to cover a payroll run, they held a meeting in Patricia's living room and took a vote, all 7 of them, that I would pay for a vacation I was not invited to attend. I remember thinking I should say something. Then I remember thinking I didn't need to. Not yet. My name is on the bill, not the reservation. I thought that at the table, looking at Patricia's patient smile. I would think it several more times before this was over. If you've ever been someone's budget line item disguised as family, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stay with me and subscribe if you're new because this one goes all the way to the end. I didn't move. That was the thing I kept circling back to later, like that I sat at that table for another 45 minutes and ate the lamb and passed the bread and said something polite about the wine while the number 4,200 hovered in the air like it had been agreed on long before I walked through the door. Derek poured himself more red. His jaw was doing the thing it does when he doesn't want to be asked about something. A tight little hold at the hinge, a studied attention to whatever is in front of him. He didn't look up, not once. After dessert, Patricia's youngest, Cara, mentioned she'd already looked at spa packages. "We'll probably do the couples treatment on day 3, she said, and everyone nodded like they were already there. I was clearing plate. On the drive home, Derek drove, and I looked at the streetlights, and neither of us said a word until we pulled into our driveway on Elmwood. Then he said, "I know it's a lot, but it'll mean a lot to her." I said okay, because at that point, I still hadn't fully processed what had happened. What exactly they had decided in Patricia's living room 3 days before that dinner, right? What the full scope of the vote was. I wouldn't know that until I asked the one person who told me the truth when he was slightly drunk, which was Derek's brother Martin, 11 days later over the phone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 19 when I took my first job, an accounts payable clerk at a logistics firm called Brandt & Sons on the west side of Columbus. The salary was $22,400 a year. I kept my weekly expenses in a spiral binder, $287 a month for a studio off Indianola, $40 for groceries, $12 for the bus pass. Every month I had $30 or $40 left, and I put it in a money market account and didn't touch it. I was not born with anything that suggested I would one day own anything. I learned early that money is a form of attention, and if you pay attention to it carefully and without romance, it tends to stay. I met Derek at 28. He was funny and warm, and he had his father's eyes, patient and dark. He sold commercial real estate and made decent money, and for the first few years, we split everything evenly, and it was good. Then the first promotion came. My salary went from $64,000 to $89,000 in 18 months, and then 2 years after that, I was at $117,000, and the split that had once felt fair started to feel like something else. Not his fault, not anyone's fault, just the arithmetic of 2 people whose earning curves had stopped running parallel. The requests started small. Patricia's refrigerator went out in January of 2011, the week of the ice storm, and Derek mentioned it over dinner, and I wrote the check the next morning. $4,700. His sister Lena's car note fell behind when her hours were cut at the salon. We covered 3 months. 1,200, 1,200, 1,200. When Derek's brother Martin lost a landscaping contract and needed a bridge to cover payroll, I moved money into his account on a Thursday afternoon without asking any questions. $15,000. Martin paid back 11 of it. I never mentioned the other 4. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you because it happened over 16 years, and I never kept a running total in my head, and I think that was the first thing I did wrong. Not the money, the absence of any record that it was mine to give. Derek knew about most of it. He thanked me each time, and then the family moved on, and the number went to the back of a drawer. The thing is, I did keep a record, I just never showed it to anyone. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in my home office, the gray 2-drawer Laurel that sat under the window behind the box of old tax returns, there was a manila folder. I'd started it in 2011, the year after the refrigerator. I labeled it household outflows, and I updated it every time money moved. Flights for Derek's niece's graduation trip, the deposit on Martin's storage unit during his divorce, the vet bill for Patricia's dog that she mentioned once, and Derek relayed to me with a look that meant he'd already promised. By the end of last year, the total was $127,400. Not a round number, not an estimate. $127,400, itemized to the transaction, dated, and sourced. I had never shown it to Derek. I had never shown it to anyone. I opened it sometimes, alone, when I needed to know I hadn't imagined my own life. The folder was still in that drawer the night of Patricia's dinner. It was still there the morning after. That detail matters. Keep it. The notification came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the dinner, which means roughly 2 weeks after Patricia had already circled the date on her calendar. I was in the break room at work, eating a sandwich at 12:40, when a colleague named Bev forwarded me a screenshot by accident. She'd been tagged in a photo on a neighborhood Facebook group and pulled up the wrong thread and sent it to me before she noticed. I almost closed it. Then I saw the name at the top, Whitmore Family March, all the Whitmores. Derek's mother, his 2 brothers, his sister Lena, his cousin Darla, who'd flown in from Phoenix 3 Christmases ago and barely spoken to me the entire visit. I told myself that wasn't unusual, a family thread without the in-law, a trip planned without looping in everyone. It happens. But I scrolled anyway, and I kept scrolling, and after about 20 minutes in that break room, Bev, long since back at her desk, I had read 6 months of messages about a resort called Vidoni Lagoon in the Maldives. Villa configurations, snorkeling excursions, arguments about whether to do the overwater restaurant on night 2 or night 4. A photograph someone had screenshotted from the resort's website, showing a wooden deck above turquoise water at sunset. Derek had been in that thread since September. I read that twice. He had talked to me about work stress in September. He'd mentioned wanting a quiet December. He had said nothing, not a single word about a family trip being planned over 6 months while I sat in the same house and paid the same bills and covered the same payroll runs and thought we were simply living our life. I scrolled to find Patricia's message. It was sent on a Sunday at 3:14 in the afternoon, between a conversation about flight connections through Dubai and a thread about passport renewal. "No need to include Rose in booking," she had typed. "She can handle the cost. She always does. Focus on the rooms." 3 words. No question mark. No qualifier. A statement of settled policy, written with the ease of someone who has never once paused to ask. I set my sandwich down. I did not finish it. I sat in that break room with the fluorescent light buzzing faintly above the coffee machine, and I thought about the refrigerator in January 2011. I thought about Martin's $4,000. I thought about 16 Christmases I had organized and the one Thanksgiving where Patricia told her book club I helped with the food when I had stood in her kitchen from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and her contribution was a bottle of sparkling cider and a comment about the gravy being a little thin. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. I had been a line item, not a guest, not a member of the family in any structural sense. A resource, reliable and silent, available for drawdown at whatever rate the occasion required. The thing about a resource is that no one holds a vote about whether to use it. They just use it. How long had this been the understanding? That was the question I could not let go of. Not whether they loved me in some ambient, untested way, but when exactly had the consensus formed, in some unspoken room I was never invited into, that Rose would be the one who funded the table while everyone else sat down and ate. I needed to know the full shape of what had been decided in Patricia's living room before that dinner. I needed to know it before I said a single word to Derek, because if I said something before I knew the full shape of it, I would only know what he chose to tell me, and I had just spent 6 months not knowing what he chose not to. So I went back to work. I finished the quarterly close. I took the call with the auditors in Chicago. I drove home on Elmwood and made dinner and watched Derek eat it, and I said nothing at all. I waited. There was something else I needed to check first. Something in that thread near the bottom of the September messages, a reference I'd skim past and then come back to. A single line from Derek's brother Martin about the arrangement, and a date. March 9th, 2019. 4 years before that dinner. Not a Maldives conversation, something older. I didn't know yet what March 9th, 2019 meant, but I had the folder and I had time. And I had learned a long time ago in a studio apartment off Indianola on $22,400 a year that patience is just attention with nowhere else to be. The itinerary came on a Thursday at 11:47 in the morning while I was eating a sandwich at my desk and reviewing a vendor contract that had nothing to do with any of this. The group text landed in a chain that included Derek's parents, his brother Martin and his wife, his sister Cora and her husband Derek, and me. 11 numbers total. The preview showed a photo attachment and Patricia's message above it. Here it is. Final details. So excited for our family adventure. The attachment was a PDF, 4 pages, formatted with a header that read Maldives Family Holiday, December 19th, 31st, 12 nights. Water villas, 2 of them, linked by a shared walkway over a lagoon at the Soneva Fushi Resort. Business class for 7 adults on Emirates out of O'Hare. Round-trip seaplane transfers from Malé. A dinner reservation at a private chef table on night 4. Snorkeling excursion. Sunset cruise. A children's program for the 3 grandkids on 2 of the afternoons. The total, itemized in a neat column on page 3, was $11,240. I read that number twice. Then I looked at the names on the booking confirmation, which Patricia had included as page 4. The reservation was under Patricia Marlowe and Derek Marlowe. Every villa booking, every airline ticket, every activity, Patricia Marlowe, primary contact. My name appeared once in the entire document, on page 3, in the payment section, next to a line that read, balance due, funded by Rose. Not Rose Marlowe, not even a last name. Just Rose, as if I were a budget line rather than a person. Patricia's separate text came 4 minutes later, sent to only Derek and me. Isn't it exciting? The kids are absolutely over the moon. Gracie asked me twice this week if Aunt Rose already paid so she can tell her friends. A pause, then. I told her you were handling it, sweetheart. I read that sentence 3 times. I told her you were handling it. The children already knew. Patricia had already told Gracie, who was 9 and guileless, and would have told her cousins, and the cousins would have gone home and told their parents. And now a 9-year-old was the reason I couldn't say no without becoming the person who disappointed a child on Christmas. I want to pause here, because if you're watching this and wondering whether I'm reading too much into it, I understand. I wondered that too, for a long time. But there's a difference between charitable interpretation and willful blindness, and I had been on the charitable side of that line for 11 years. I'll let you decide where the line is. If you're watching from somewhere that has ever required you to make that call, drop it in the comments. I think you'll know exactly what I mean, and if you've been here since the beginning, thank you for staying with me. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. I finished the vendor contract. I sent 3 emails. I sat in a budget meeting at 2 p.m., and contributed 2 observations about Q4 variants that the VP of Operations called sharp. I drove out of the parking garage at 5:20, and I did not immediately go home. I pulled into the Walgreens parking lot on Sycamore, 3 blocks from the office, and I sat with the engine running, and I opened my email. Patricia had forwarded something to Derek on Tuesday. Derek had not mentioned it. I had seen the forward notification on the shared tablet we kept in the kitchen, the one neither of us used anymore because we both had phones, the one that still auto-synced to Derek's Gmail because he'd set it up years ago and never changed the settings. I had seen the notification and said nothing and waited until I had a private moment, which was now. The email Patricia had forwarded was a document. The subject line was FW, Marlowe Family Planning Notes, Q4. It was 3 pages. The first page was a summary of Thanksgiving logistics. The second page was Christmas gift coordination, who was buying what for which grandchild, a careful table with initials and dollar amounts. Thoughtful, organized, the kind of thing Patricia was genuinely good at. It was formatted like meeting minutes. Date at the top, October 11th, which was 11 days ago. Attendees, Patricia, Gerald, Martin, Cora. Not Derek, not me. 5 agenda items, each with a short paragraph of notes. Agenda item 3 was titled Funding Rose. The notes read, discussed holiday budget. Patricia confirmed Rose has indicated willingness to contribute significantly to the family trip as a gesture of gratitude for family support over the years. Agreed that Patricia will send itinerary once finalized. Martin raised question of the joint account. Patricia confirmed this has been the arrangement for some time and Derek is aware. Cora suggested we not discuss the dollar figure with Derek directly to avoid awkwardness. Agreed. Patricia confirmed Rose has indicated willingness. I had indicated no such thing. I had never had that conversation. What I had done at a dinner in August was say that I thought it would be nice to take a family trip sometime, that it might be good for the kids to travel somewhere special. That was the entire quote. That was what Patricia had translated in meeting minutes into willingness to fund $11,240 for 12 people. Martin raised question of the joint account. Patricia confirmed this has been the arrangement for some time and Derek is aware. My hands were very still on the steering wheel. The engine was still running. A man walked past with a dog, a small brown terrier that stopped and looked at my car and then kept walking. I put the phone in my bag. I drove home on Rosewood, not Elmwood. Took the long way, made dinner, chicken thighs with a lemon pan sauce, a salad, bread I had bought that morning. Derek ate and talked about a project at work and asked whether I'd seen the itinerary. I said yes. He said, pretty incredible, right? I said, it's something. He didn't notice the phrasing. We watched 30 minutes of television and I went to bed and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours and did not say a single word about any of it. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. There was a thing I needed to do, not a dramatic thing, not a phone call, not a confrontation, a quiet thing, the kind you do in the dark when the rest of the house is asleep, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside. At 12:40 in the morning, I got up, went to the study, and closed the door. The manila folder had been in the bottom drawer of my file cabinet for 8 years, since the week we'd moved into this house. I had kept it because I am the kind of person who keeps things, who grew up in a studio off Indianola with a $22,400 salary and a box of every document I'd ever signed, because my mother told me once that paperwork is armor, and I had never forgotten it. I opened the folder on the desk under the lamp, and I went through it slowly. The joint checking account, the one Patricia called communal, the one Martin referenced in those minutes, the one that had been drained in predictable patterns every spring and December for 6 years, was opened in March of 2018. Both our names on it, Derek's and mine. The signature card, which I had requested a copy of when we opened it and which still lived in this folder, showed one named account holder with primary authorization to request account changes or issue instructions to the bank. That holder was not Derek. The second document was a deed, Patricia's condo on Birchwood Avenue, the one she'd bought in 2015 when Gerald retired and they downsized. Patricia had not qualified for the mortgage alone, not after the line of credit she'd taken against her previous house, and the bank had required a cosigner. Derek had been traveling for work that February. It had been a Tuesday, and Patricia had called me and I had driven to the title company on my lunch hour and I had signed. I don't think Patricia had ever thought about what that meant legally. I don't think she thought about it at all, because to think about it would require her to consider me as a person with agency, which was not how she thought about me. To Patricia, I was a resource with a warm face. I was the line in the meeting minutes, funding Rose. The bank statements were the last thing in the folder. I had printed them off 3 months ago just to have them, the way you check a smoke detector battery on a quiet Sunday, not because you smell smoke, but because it is a thing you need to know. 6 years of consistent deposits into that joint account from my freelance contracts and later my salary, and a pattern of withdrawals that didn't match any household expense I could identify. Amounts between $800 and $3,200. Irregular but frequent. 31 months of them. I stacked the papers very carefully. I put them back in the folder. I clipped the folder shut. The family did not know I had reviewed any of it. As far as Patricia was concerned, I was the funding line in the meeting minutes, cooperative and unexamined, good for another decade at least. I sat in that chair for a long time with the lamp burning and the house quiet. There is a question I had started asking myself in that parking lot on Sycamore, and I had not answered it yet, and I was not going to answer it that night. But It sat in the room with me, present and patient, the way I had learned off Indianola at $22,400 a year to be patient. Patricia's condo in Birchwood had appreciated. The current estimate, which I had looked at on Zillow 3 weeks ago while waiting for a meeting to start, was $387,000. The original purchase price in 2015 had been $241,000. The mortgage balance, which I had found in a statement Patricia had left open on the kitchen tablet at Easter, was $189,000. I did not know yet what I was going to do, but I knew what I had, and for the first time in 11 years, those were very different things. Derek came home with grocery store roses on a Wednesday evening. They were the kind that come in cellophane with a rubber band around the stems, $6.99 at the Kroger on Vine, though he would have called them a gesture. He set them on the kitchen counter beside my coffee maker and said, "I talked to her." I told her she crossed a line. He was looking at my face the way he always did when he needed to read whether the bridge was going to hold. I filled a glass with water and put the roses in it. They were orange, which he knew I liked. That detail almost got him. She said she understood, that she shouldn't have handled it the way she did. He paused. "She's going to back off." I nodded. I want to be honest about this part because it matters to everything that came after. I believed him, or I believed that he believed it. Derek is not a cruel man. He is a man who has never had to choose between his wife and his mother and has therefore never admitted to himself that is exactly what he keeps being asked to do. He heard what he needed to hear from Patricia and brought me roses and called it resolved, and I let myself, for approximately 48 hours, feel something close to relief. The roses were still in the water glass 2 nights later when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower. I was not looking for anything. I want to be clear about that, too. I was rinsing a pan at the sink, and the screen lit up 4 feet away, and the preview was long enough that I read it before I decided not to. It said, "She'll send it Thursday, I promise. Just don't push her." I stood at the sink. The water was still running over my hands. I turned it off. I did not pick up the phone. I did not check the thread for context. I already had the context. I had had it for 11 years. My name was on the bill, not the reservation, and the conversation I was never included in had just confirmed that Derek's call to his mother had not been about protecting me from her. It had been about managing her timeline. The roses were orange, and they smelled faintly of the plastic they had been wrapped in. I dried my hands on the dish towel and went to sit in the living room, and I waited for Derek to come out of the shower, and when he did, I was pleasant and tired, and I said I was going to bed early. He kissed my forehead. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Long week." He seemed satisfied with that, because it was the kind of answer that required nothing from him. I lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about something my mother said to me once. The year I was 26 and finishing my CPA licensing in a shared apartment off Indianola with a space heater and 4 credit cards balanced against each other like a house of cards. She said, "Rose, the people who want something from you will always be nicer to you right before they take it." She was talking about a landlord at the time. But she was right about a lot of other things, too. Patricia's birthday brunch was that Sunday. If you're watching from somewhere with a family like this, drop a comment below. I want to know I am not the only one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay with me, because this story is only just getting started. The venue was Hartwell's on Riverside, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a Sunday prefix, and a host who knows everyone's name before they reach the table. Patricia had made the reservation 6 weeks out. Derek's brother Nathan was there with his wife Cara. Derek's aunt Sylvia had driven in from Dayton. 2 cousins, Brianna and Mark, sat at the far end. 8 people total, including me. The table had been reserved under Patricia's name. The brunch began pleasantly. There were mimosas and a charcuterie board, and Sylvia talked about her garden, and Nathan told a long story about a work trip that everyone had heard before but laughed at again. Patricia was in a cream blazer with her pearl studs, her silver-white bob freshly set, performing the gracious matriarch she had spent 40 years rehearsing. She touched my arm twice. She called me sweetheart. I smiled exactly the right amount. When the server cleared the appetizer plates, Nathan raised his glass. The trip, the table repeated, and the glasses touched, and I raised mine. The resort was called Viejo Mar, on the Pacific coast of Mexico, A long weekend in October that Derek and I had been looped into 3 months earlier when Patricia decided a family vacation was what she needed to feel close to her children again. The rate she had selected was $1,140 per night for the suite Derek and I would share, plus a shared villa package for the extended family totaling another $6,800. I had not confirmed whether I was paying for any of it. I had been told by Derek that Patricia was covering the main costs and the details would be figured out. Patricia reached into her bag after the toast and placed a folded sheet of paper on the white tablecloth. She slid it across to me with 2 fingers, the way someone passes a check they are not paying. "For your files, darling," she said. "So you have the full breakdown." It was a printed resort invoice, itemized, highlighted in 2 places, the per night rate for our suite, and a line item in the party balance column marked R. Archer, $4,120. Sylvia was asking Brianna about her new apartment. Mark was laughing at something on Nathan's phone. Derek was reaching for the bread. Patricia was already turning to answer a question Kara had asked about the villa check-in time. The laughter continued. The mimosas were refilled. Not one person at that table glanced my direction. I picked up the invoice. I folded it once, along the existing crease. I placed it in my bag. I smiled at the table in the general direction of no one in particular, and my hands were very still. I had made them be still. That is what years of practice looks like. You learn to make your hands be still while the room keeps moving around you as though nothing happened. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. The brunch continued for another 90 minutes. I ate the salmon. I laughed at 2 things I found genuinely funny. I told Sylvia her garden sounded beautiful and meant it. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, Patricia hugged me and said it had been so lovely, and I agreed that it had been, and then I got into the passenger seat and Derek pulled out of the lot and said, "Mom really outdid herself, didn't she?" And I said, "She always does." I did not speak again until he stopped for gas on Route 7. Then I said I needed to make a call and stepped out. I called Warren from the parking structure on 4th. Warren had been managing my separate accounts, the ones I had opened quietly in my own name 6 years ago, after a conversation about joint finances that had left me with a particular feeling I had learned not to ignore. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed a full portfolio review before Friday. Michael had been the property attorney on the condo deed transaction in 2017. I had referred 2 clients to him afterward, and he always picked up when I called. I told him I had a hypothetical question about sold deed properties and shared expense arrangements, and what documentation would be necessary to establish clean financial separation. He said, "How hypothetical is this?" I said, "Not very." He said he had a slot Thursday morning at 9. That evening, I drove to a branch of Meridian Community Bank on Garfield, one I had never used before, and I opened an account in my name only. No joint access, no connected cards. The minimum deposit was $100. I transferred $100. At dinner, Derek made pasta carbonara and told me about a podcast he had been listening to, and asked if I wanted to watch something later, and I said sure. What did he have in mind? We watched 40 minutes of a documentary about deep-sea fish, and I put my feet under his leg on the couch, the way I always had, and he covered them with his hand, without looking up from the screen. He did not notice anything. He rarely did. And I had stopped holding that against him, because noticing would have required him to ask a question he was not ready to answer. $31,400. That was the total of what I had contributed in documented, traceable payments to Patricia's household, Patricia's vacations, Patricia's car registration, and now, according to the invoice currently sitting in my bag, Patricia's upcoming resort weekend from the spring of 2014 through that Sunday brunch at Hartwell's on Riverside. I had started keeping the receipts in a folder on my desktop in 2020. The folder was labeled Miss Combe. It contained 47 items. Warren was available at 8:30 Friday morning. Patricia's deed was a matter of public record in the county assessor's database, and I had known the numbers by heart for 3 weeks. Somewhere between the documentary and the moment I turned out the light, I understood that the question I had been sitting with since the parking lot on Sycamore was no longer sitting with me, patient and waiting. It had already begun to move, quietly without announcement, the way most serious things do when a person who has spent 11 years being careful finally decides to stop being only careful. Alina arrived at 11:30 on Sunday with a canvas grocery bag over one shoulder and an external hard drive in her hand. She didn't ask whether I was sure. Elena is 4 years younger than me. She teaches tax law at Worthington Community College, and she has a way of sitting very still across a table while she reads something that makes you want her on your side of any room she's in. I had printed everything I could the night before. Wire confirmations from our joint account at First National. The receipts for Patricia's Riverside Drive condo plumbing emergency in March 2017. The dental bill for Derek's brother Colt that came to $4,800 after insurance, which Patricia had called a family bridge loan and never mentioned again. I spread it across the kitchen table, poured 2 cups of coffee, and let Elena read. She didn't say anything for almost 20 minutes. Rose. She looked up. Do you know what this is? It's not a rough idea. She pulled a yellow legal pad from her bag and uncapped a pen. Let's be precise. 16 years of transfers, covered emergencies, and quietly absorbed costs, laid out by date, category, and amount. The Riverside Drive plumbing job, $6,200. The catering deposit for Colt's first wedding, which Patricia had described as a down payment she would cover from the settlement and which never came back, $8,500. The 2-car insurance lapses Derek's youngest sister Marta ran up before she found steady work, which I had rolled into our own policy without telling anyone, because the alternative was Marta losing her license, $11,000 over 3 years. The property tax shortfall in the Sycamore house in 2019, when Patricia's annuity was restructured, and she called Derek at 7 in the morning while he was in the shower, $22,400. Line by line, Elena added them in pencil. The total came to $127,400. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. Elena set the pen down. She didn't use the word shocking. What she said was, did Derek ever sit down with this the way we're sitting down with it right now? I had to be fair to him, even then. I didn't want to make it a fight. Elena looked at me with the expression she uses when a student has handed in work that misunderstands the assignment. Not unkind, just clear. It already was a fight, Rose. You just weren't allowed to know you were in one. I picked up my coffee cup. It had gone cold without my noticing. We were organizing the second folder when Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, set it face down, then picked it back up and turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot. A friend named Gail, who moved in the same North Side social circuit as Patricia, had sent it with no comment beyond. Is this Patricia M? The screenshot showed a text exchange, blurry at the edges but readable. Someone signing her messages P was describing her daughter-in-law to what appeared to be a book club thread. The phrase, controlling with money, appeared in one message. Another said, never really part of the family if I'm being honest, but we try. A third, longer one said the family had carried her through some difficult years, but that it was hard to get real gratitude from someone so transactional. The second time I noticed my own hand was very flat on the table, pressing down the way you press on something to keep it still. Elena said quietly, do you want to put this in the second folder? I took a screenshot with my own phone. Then I said yes. Monday moved the way certain days do when you are carrying something no one around you can see. I went to the office. I had 2 client calls, one at 9 and one at 2, and I took both from the conference room because I needed somewhere with a door that closed. I ate lunch at my desk. I did not call Warren or Elena. There was a kind of equilibrium I needed to protect. Not calm exactly, but the sustained impression of calm, which in the short term is almost the same thing. It was not carelessness, exactly. I had the laptop open to a bank summary page, a download from our joint investment account at Meridian, and I got up to start the kettle and forgot to minimize the window the way I had been minimizing every window that touched the last 3 weeks. Derek came in from the living room while I was at the stove. I heard the particular silence that means someone is reading something they weren't meant to see. I did not turn around immediately. I counted 2 seconds, then turned the way a person turns when there is nothing to hide, and looked at him. What's this? His voice was easy, the tone he uses when he is uncertain whether to be concerned. I walked back to the table with the pace that means nothing at all. I sat down, looked at the screen as though seeing it fresh, and said, sweep account for a client escrow project. The summary gets messy at the end of the quarter. One of the Henderson accounts, you know how those get. He didn't know the Henderson accounts. He had never asked about my accounts. I did not let myself breathe differently. He came back through 12 minutes later to say he was going upstairs to finish a call. The moment I heard the office door close above me, I opened the laptop, transferred the file to my encrypted drive, cleared the browser history back 48 hours, and shut the lid. 20 minutes after that, sitting at the table reading a document I was not reading, my phone lit up. Derek had sent me a text rather than calling from the next floor the way he usually would. Forgot to tell you, talked to Mom earlier. Just wanted to let her know about Sunday dinner. He had not mentioned his mother. He had not mentioned calling his mother. He had mentioned talking to her in the past tense, as an afterthought, and only because he sent the text at all, the way something slips out when a person is deciding whether to say it. 45 seconds later, a second notification lit up the screen of his phone, which was sitting face up on the counter across the room where he'd left it before going upstairs. I could only read the first line before the screen timed out. I stood at the counter for a moment looking at the dark glass. What I needed was to understand whether Patricia had told him to watch, or whether Derek had offered on his own, and I understood then that the answer to that question didn't change Thursday. It only changed what I thought of him, and I was already revising that. Thursday came in gray, a low overcast that hadn't decided whether it would rain. I was up at 6:15. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the 2 printed pages I had been keeping in the locked drawer of my desk for 9 days, and read them one more time, the way you read something you already know by heart, just to feel the weight of knowing it fully. The first page was the ledger. $127,400, formatted in a plain table, dated entries running back to 2009, Elena's handwriting in the margin beside the totals, confirmed and cross-referenced. The second page was the condo deed, photocopied from the county assessor's records. Patricia's name as borrower. My name on the cosigner line from the same April morning in 2011 when I had agreed because Derek had asked me the night before and because I did not yet understand what agreeing would always cost. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. I folded the pages and set them on the table. Patricia called my cell at 9:04. I watched the phone vibrate against the counter and let it roll to voicemail. The notification read, Mom. She called at 11:17. I was in a client meeting, which was true, though I would have let it roll regardless. She called at 2:12. I was at my desk, eating a sandwich. I set the sandwich down, watched the phone ring 4 times, and let it go. I did not feel what I expected to feel, which was some clean version of power. What I felt was a steady heaviness, like standing in water at chest height, knowing it will not rise further, knowing you can hold exactly this depth for as long as the situation requires. Derek texted at 4:40 to say he was leaving the office. At 5:50, I heard his car in the driveway, the side door, his keys on the hook, the refrigerator door, then a pause in the kitchen that lasted longer than it should have. He was already carrying something when he appeared in the study doorway. I could hear it in the way he stood, the way he didn't sit. They're waiting on you, he said, not angry. Not exactly, something rehearsed. Then I reached into the desk drawer, pulled out the 2 printed pages, and set them on the desk between us. He looked at them without picking them up. What is this? He said, and this time the easy tone was gone entirely. I know, I said, quietly. I've been waiting too. The room went very still. Derek's eyes moved across the ledger page, down the columns, past the years, and I watched his face do the thing faces do when they encounter a number too large and too specific to dismiss. $127,400 in plain rose, the oldest entry dated March 14th, 2009, his mother's address on Riverside Drive printed at the top. He hadn't picked up the pages. He stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, reading the thing that had been true in this house for 16 years, and invisible until now. Whatever he had been told to say next, he didn't say it. He stayed in that doorway for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked on and off in its cycle, the way it did every Thursday evening, whether anyone noticed or not. Where did you get these numbers? He said. Not quite a question. My files, I said. 15 years of files. He finally picked up the papers, all 9 pages. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where his mother had once told me that a woman who doesn't cook for her husband isn't really a wife, and I watched him read. I didn't make coffee. I didn't sit. I stood at the counter with my arms loose at my sides and waited for the thing I had waited for, in some version, since March 2009. He got to the condo entries, the 4 pages covering the Claremont purchase. He set them down on the table face up and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "She told me your firm handled it as a favor," he said. "A professional courtesy." He didn't answer. That was its own answer. I told him we would talk more on Friday. That I needed one night to think clearly. He didn't argue. There was nothing in the ledger to argue against. I slept in the guest room on a bed I had bought 7 years ago, which I had never once used, and I did not cry. I was too tired for crying and too clear in my head. I thought about my mother counting bus fare into 4 piles at the kitchen table, 1987, so each of us could get to school. I thought about the scholarship to Fordham that nobody in the family had understood, and my aunt who said I was getting too big for my shoes, and how I had held that phrase for 3 years before I understood it had nothing to do with my shoes. I had been the invoice in that family too, not the guest, the one who paid. The email was drafted by 6:15, 9 pages of ledger, scanned and attached as one PDF. The condo deed, which I had requested from the county recorder's office 2 weeks earlier as a courtesy copy. A 1-page letter, single-spaced, 12-point Garamond, which I had written, revised, and set aside 3 separate times before I arrived at the version I sent. It said the following, in plain words, effective immediately. I was withdrawing all financial support from Patricia and Thomas Harmon. I was initiating a legal review of my co-signer obligations on the Claremont condo. Any further financial requests should be directed to my attorney, whose name and address were printed at the bottom of the page. I addressed it to the full family group. Patricia, Thomas, Derek's brother Brian, Brian's wife Sandra, Derek. I hit send at 6:22 a.m. Then I made real coffee, the good Ethiopian blend from the shop on West 4th. And I sat at my desk and watched the morning come through the window. The subject line was "You are gent." The body was 1 paragraph. It contained no apology. What it contained was the suggestion that I had clearly misunderstood the arrangement, that the family had always intended to repay me when they were in a more stable position, that withdrawing support now would be deeply damaging to people who love you, that it was not necessary to involve attorneys in what was a family matter, and that she hoped I would reconsider before doing something I could not take back. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had not known. She used the word love 4 times in 11 sentences, and not once did she address a single line item in 9 pages of figures. I read it once, I forwarded it to my attorney. By 11:40 a.m., my phone had 3 missed calls from Brian. Not from Patricia, not from Derek. Brian, who had never once called me in 16 years except to ask whether Derek was available. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. On the 3rd, I answered. "Rose," he said, "I just want to understand what's happening. The resort is saying there's a problem with the deposit." There it was, the Scottsdale resort. The anniversary trip Patricia had booked using my credit card number, which she had not asked to use. I had called the resort on Wednesday and canceled the card authorization. I had not announced I was going to do that. I had just done it. "That's between the resort and whoever made the reservation," I said. "Rose, the whole family was planning on this trip. Sandra's mother already bought a plane ticket." "Brian," I said, "I was not on the guest list for that trip." My name was on the bill, not the reservation. Those are 2 different things. He went quiet. When he spoke again, the register had dropped, lower and more careful, the way a person sounds when they are trying to retrieve something they have already lost. He said he thought we could work something out. He said his mother was upset. He said Derek was struggling. None of those things were questions, and none of them were apologies, and I listened to all of them calmly, because I had learned years ago in a negotiation seminar in a hotel in Cincinnati that when someone is trying to retrieve what is already gone, you let them talk until they run out of road. Brian ran out of road around the 11-minute mark. "I hope your mother-in-law has a comfortable August," I said. "Take care, Brian. The resort canceled the deposit at 12:03 p.m. I know the exact time because I got an automated confirmation email and I was at Marisol on Broome Street with Elena when it arrived. Elena, who had listened to 16 years of this story in pieces over coffee and bad wine and phone calls at midnight when I couldn't make sense of things. I showed her the email. She read it. She set down her fork She laughed. It was the first real laugh I had produced in 4 days, and we ordered the branzino and split a bottle of Verdejo, and I did not look at my phone again for 2 hours. Derek called at 3:15. He asked if I was coming home for dinner. That call at 3:15 was where we actually started. The voice on the other end of the line was not the voice of a man trying to manage a situation. It was the voice of someone who had spent the night with 9 pages of numbers and a mirror and did not entirely like what he saw. We sat at the kitchen table that night and talked for 3 hours. Not perfectly. There were silences I didn't know how to cross and things he said that I will need months to set down somewhere and examine. But he asked questions. Real ones. He asked why I hadn't told him about the ledger years ago, and I told him the truth. I had tried, twice, and been made to feel like the difficult one for bringing money into what was supposed to be family. He didn't argue with that, he just sat with it, the way a person sits with a thing when they know it's true. We scheduled the first appointment with a therapist for the following Tuesday, a woman named Drive, Ilaria Voss, whose office is on Riverside Drive, 6 blocks from his mother's apartment. I noted that. I said nothing about it. The Scottsdale trip never happened. The resort refunded Patricia's deposit, minus a $400 cancellation fee, which she paid herself. I do not know how I did not ask. The Claremont condo moved into legal resolution, a process that took 4 months and 3 letters and ended with Derek's parents refinancing into their own names and my liability removed from the deed entirely. It was concluded quietly without a hearing on a Wednesday in November. Patricia did not call me again until August 14th. I wrote the date down. She called at 11 in the morning and her voice was different. Smaller somehow. She said she wanted to see if I was well. She did not mention the ledger. She did not mention the condo. She asked about my work, and I told her it was going well, and she said that was good, and we talked for 6 minutes about nothing, and then said goodbye. I stood in the kitchen afterward and thought, that is what accountability sounds like when it cannot yet say its own name. I was patient. I had learned patience from years of being the Bill. That first Friday night, after the email and Brian's calls and the branzino with Elena and the 3-hour kitchen conversation, I sat alone at my desk. The house was quiet. Derek had gone to bed early. I lit the small soy candle I keep on the corner of the desk, the one that smells like cedar and something I have never been able to name, and I sat in that light and let the week settle into its actual shape. $127,400. 16 years. A ledger nobody had ever thought to ask me to keep because it never once occurred to them that I was keeping it. My name was on the bill, not the reservation. I took the copy of the 1-page letter from the printer tray, folded it in thirds, and placed it in the file with everything else. The deeds. The receipts. The email with the "You Are Gent" subject line and the 4 uses of the word love. All of it. If this story found you somewhere real, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and whether you have ever let someone use your name like a resource rather than a person. Tap subscribe if you want to hear what comes next, because this was the last chapter of that particular silence, not the last chapter of my life.